is on globalisation, the future of globalisation in a post-COVID-19 world. It would be a truism to say that over the last decade, the trends of globalisation have only accelerated, while in many parts of the world, the fruits of globalisation have increasingly been subject to question by many in civil society. The arrival last year of the COVID-19 pandemic has, if anything, exacerbated those trends, I'd argue. On one hand, we've been locked behind our borders, our previous comfort with freedom of movement severely curtailed, migration patterns stopped in their tracks, and the gulf between the wealthiest and the poorest nations more starkly evident than ever. Yet the abilities of nations to work together to combat the pandemic has also never been more important, while the ability to continue to trade across borders has been vital to maintaining economic resilience. It's probably too early to say that we're in a truly post-COVID period, but the outlines of life after the most severe global pandemic in more than a century are starting to emerge. And that's the broad topic that we're addressing this evening. To set the scene, and joining us from India, where the true cost and scale of the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic is better known than perhaps most other countries, is Deepak Bagla. Deepak is the Managing Director and CEO of Invest India, the Indian government's national investment promotion and facilitation agency, and a member of several high-level government committees working in the areas of fintech, innovation and infrastructure, which I would observe are probably the greater areas of opportunity for New Zealand in trade than the long-sought and constantly receding goal of a free trade agreement. So thank you for joining us this evening, Deepak. We look forward to your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good evening. It's such a pleasure. And you know, I must say, coming from Delhi, it is truly a pleasure to see you all in a room without masks, sitting next to each other, and the good old times. The energy in that room is so palpable, and we are just waiting for a day when we can all be in that position. You all are blessed, and may God keep you that way. It's been quite a year, if I may say so in some words. That little virus has changed our lives, and I think it has reoriented our lives completely. It will never be the same again. You would have heard the minister, you would have heard others say that it has been a fairly unprecedented time for us. The first wave impacted livelihoods. The second wave was very unexpectedly so brutal that it touched each and every family in a way which will remain as a pain forever. But apart from that, let me just talk a little about what we went through on the business side of it and what is happening with my experience in Invest India. As has been explained, Invest India is the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of the government. We are the first point of contact for any foreign investor coming into the country. That's my first vertical. We handhold them completely, help them establish their business, and even after the business is set up, take care of their business to see that it runs well. The second part of my vertical is Startup India. As you know, Honorable Prime Minister Modi launched Startup India in 2016, January. Invest India is the execution arm for Startup India. And that's a remarkable story for all of us. And that is a story which has played a very interesting role in us trying to combat this pandemic. And just to put it in perspective for you, in a short period of 5 years, India today is number 3 in the world in number of unicorns, number 2 in the world in number of startups, and number 1 in the world with new startups adding every day. In fact, I added a unicorn, one unicorn a month, every month last year, even during the lockdown. And since the beginning of this year, we've already added 10 more unicorns. My third vertical is the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative, where we take innovation and where we do it a fast track onto commercialization and also pick up solutions for the entire world. That's also a very interesting point. Coming back to our point on the post-globalization and how we are expecting our lives to be just after this pandemic, let me just share a few statistics with you. You know, we start our financial year in April and we end it in March. So this April, this 31st March, we had an FDI of $81.7 billion, the highest ever FDI we've got in our history. We got it from over 89 countries. And you know what is more interesting is that if you look at the global statistics, Globally, FDI went down by close to 40%, 35 to 40% during this time, while India's share of FDI went up by 10%. This is very interesting, all in the middle of this lockdown. And let me give you another statistic on that. India today has moved its position from being in the top 10 destinations for FDI now to the top 5 destinations in the world. And it's interesting to see why this is happening. Even though we had the worst lockdown, the hit, etc. I mean, I know we are all in the same storm, but we are in different boats. And our boat really got rocked, especially during the past few months. But if I go by the IMF statistics, and I like those because I think they've been fairly accurate and they've been fairly rational. They, even after bringing it down and for the second wave, they are looking at India's growth story at about 9.5% going forward for the next few years. That means India retains its position of being the fastest growing large economy on the planet, the same position as we had before the start of this pandemic. It's very interesting, and that's very important to look at. The other interesting point on that one is there are discussions, will it be a V, will it be a U, will it be a K? I don't want to get into the alphabets per se. But as we look at it today, even after the brutal second wave, we see a flatter V or a sharper U coming up. And let me tell you why I'm saying that. The reason why I say that is because the inherent strengths of India and its resilience are now which are taking India to the fore in that positioning of being one of the largest opportunities on the planet for investment and one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. And why do I say that? Look at my first one, demographics. I'll be 1.5 billion by 2025-26. I'll be the largest human capital on the planet. But more interestingly, 1 billion of those will be under the age of 35. I have an average age of 29. I'm the youngest on the planet, at least for the next 80 years. And why that I'm saying is important to help us get out of it is because of this demographic strength, the resilience and the ability of a nation and a society to walk out of a pandemic like this and restructure and resurrect itself is far greater. The second part to that is innovation. This is the biggest unprecedented story of innovation, what is happening in India today. Let me give you an example of the pandemic itself. 25th of March last year is when we went into a lockdown. On that 1st of April, we hardly had any PPEs. We had no ventilators in India. And in fact, we had no masks in India. My team got together. They were working with all startups and innovators. And in a short period of time, these startups and innovations, by the 15th of July, I had PPEs, ventilators, masks, not just enough for my own self, but exporting them across the globe to Europe, to the US, and everywhere else. And why did that happen? The ability of innovation and the smart ability of my MSMEs and my innovations and startups, where they could pivot their business models very fast. And with that frugal innovation, expand and scale up and create all what was required. These are the inherent strengths which are going to propel an economy going forward. The nimbleness, the ability to pivot your business models, and the ability to create frugal innovation in the best possible manner to create solutions to issues. And the last point I take on that is my digitization. This was a focused effort of this government led by Prime Minister Modi. And frankly, if you look at it, digitization is the soul which has helped us immensely, not just in fighting and managing this pandemic in the possible way, but also helping industry in any and every possible way. If you look at statistics, India today has one of the highest rates of adoption of digitization. And let me tell you how it has impacted industry from that perspective. For the first time in human economic history, a brand new company got 100 million new customers in 180 days at a cost per acquisition, which was 1/5 of a global average. How did that happen? You have over 1 billion people with a mobile phone. You have 1 billion people attached to a bank account. And now in the next 2 years, you'll have 1 billion people on the internet. Just think of the strength of that India stack. The ability to reach out for each and every service or product. And that, to my mind, is going to be the story which is going to take us out of this pandemic and lead us to a completely new India going forward. This digitization is now going to change the engine of growth, not just limited to the few big cities and metro centers of India, but to the small towns and cities of India. The new India, as we're looking at it, is going to be a bottom-up India, where my MSMEs, my innovation, my startups, my big companies, they're all going to get together and join in a singularity towards that purpose of growth. And the most important thing which is working on this going forward is the entire effort of the government. Prime Minister said that he wants to change that red tape into a red carpet. Well, you're already seeing it happen. During this lockdown, and it has now been acknowledged that the government was on 24/7, and they are in the process of digitizing the entire investor journey. You will come onto my website. Please do that. In fact, it's now rated as one of the better websites of the world. From the website itself, not only will you get all information, but we're going to be soon doing a soft launch of a single window from which you will be able to put in one application which will seek you all approvals in the government of India and the state governments. And you will have a dedicated relationship manager from my team to handhold you through that entire journey. In fact, we've also digitized the land part of it, where you have to look for locations. You can come onto my website. And again, we have in India Industrial Systems, we have over 200,000 hectares of land already on it, mapped. And every day there are new land parcels being mapped. You can get onto that, see the plot, see the location. And soon we are coming on to the point where you'll be able to pay and apply for that land too. The touch points are going away. There is transparency, there is space, and there is going to be that ease of doing business. And that is what explains why India is jumping in those positions. Investment, you know it all better, is about opportunity. It's the biggest ever opportunity. Nowhere else, at least for the next 200 years, will you have 1.5 billion customers within a single national geographic boundary. It is about ease of doing business. Even the World Bank has said that the jump which India has made on the ease of doing business is unprecedented. As I said, it's about opportunity, it's about ease of doing business, and it is about trust. It is about trust that tomorrow of India is going to be better than today, and every tomorrow is going to be better than every today. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to India. There is a new India. And let me tell you, there is a new India which is now open to the entire world. In fact, most of my sectors have 100% FDI which you can invest in. And we are there to walk with you through this journey. Welcome, and thank you again, the New Zealand India Business Council, for getting us all together. It really means a lot. Thank you, excellencies, dignitaries, captains of the industry, and my friends, and we are here to answer any questions after this. Back to you. Thank you. I hope I have not exceeded my 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deepak. You've set the scene for a challenging discussion. It's my pleasure now to welcome to the stage the panel for that discussion. First up, can I welcome Deirdre Ortene. Deirdre is a member of the Post-COVID Economic Recovery Leadership Board and former Chief Executive of Te Tahitanga e Mahi Kaha Trust, Māori development agency working in the northern region of New Zealand, and now working with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise to build exports of Māori business, which are emerging as one of the most dynamic and interesting new sources of economic dynamism in New Zealand. Kia ora, Deirdre. Kevin Jenkins, who will be known to many of you, founder of the consultancy Martin Jenkins. Kevin works at the intersection of business, innovation and regulation. Has had a long involvement with the INZBC. Welcome, Kevin. Our next panellist is Professor Guy Littlefair, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor of International Pro-Vice Chancellor International and Dean of the Faculty of Design and Creative Technologies at AUT, and has a long and distinguished international career in both academia and innovation-led manufacturing businesses. Also joining us from New Delhi is Ralph Hayes, the New Zealand Trade Commissioner and Consul General to India and Sri Lanka. And moderating this session is my old friend Sunil Kaushal, who is standing in tonight for Kamal Vasilich, who has been unable to attend this evening, unfortunately. So, Sunil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pat. Just before we go on to the panel discussions, we've got another keynote address from Mumbai, from Akshay Mathur. Akshay, welcome. You got 7 minutes, and hope you can hear me, because after 7 minutes I might knock on the microphone. It's nearly dinner time here, but welcome. Over to you.
I can hear you and your thread, which I welcome very much.
Thanks very much.
Respect very much. But thank you for having me. Thanks to the India-New Zealand Business Council. I wanted to make 2 points that hopefully can also be addressed during the panel discussion. The topic today is on globalization and the post-COVID scenario. And there are 2 or 3 things that we are tracking here at the Observer Research Foundation on globalization, because that's the study area on which I work on. One of the things is how is globalization getting reconfigured? And if you look at most of the statistics, at least the global statistics, there'll be some indications that globalization obviously took a hit, but it is back in some form. The logistics are back and they're operational again. The trade in goods is nearly back to what it used to be. That's at least what the DHL index shows. The capital flows are not at the same levels, but they seem to be coming back to where they need to be. But of course, the people movement is restricted. Now, I think one of the things that's going to happen in the post-globalization scenario is that there is a serious realignment that is taking place. And whether it's a realignment because it is geopolitics that is dictating what business can do, or whether it is because there are certain kinds of firms that just want to be in some areas. You know, we all know Europe is still very, very globalized. I mean, the trade to GDP ratios are really very high. So Europe's interest, and for that matter, much of the OECD world's interest in getting globalization to work again is very high. But I think going forward, the globalization is going to be increasingly be dictated by more like-minded nations. I think the era of interdependencies and mutual economic benefit is over. I think we're entering an area of globalization with like-minded nations. You can call it a quad-led influence. You can call it a China +1 strategy. You've seen the emergence of D10. You saw the invitation. You saw the dynamics of the G7, where there was the invitation to 4 other democracies. You've seen the establishment of Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. I think these are, which also has a network of democracies. So I think there is certainly going to be a marked shift in globalization towards more like-minded nations. The second thing is, I think we are currently in a place where geopolitics and geoeconomics are fighting for their space. We saw that in the case of US-China trade war and sanctions on Iran, that geopolitics actually trumped geoeconomics. I think in the end, national security issues were more important. But when it came to, say, the Quad, geoeconomics has actually resisted geopolitics. So we've not seen the kind of shift away that we actually are likely to see going forward. So that's my second point, that I think the tension between geopolitics and geoeconomics is likely to continue. So if this reconfiguration is taking place, what is it that we need to do as policymakers? I'm in the policy research space. The main area that we are looking at now is what kind of framework, what kind of global framework, regulation, norms, responsibilities have to be put in line, have to be put forward for this new kind of globalization, this new realignment to work. So, so there are 3 or 4 things, for instance, which needs to work to ensure that this new globalization is working. A global agreement in trade and services, for instance, is still not forthcoming. We need deep conversations on domestic regulations because that's what's going to be impacted when you negotiate with a foreign country. We need that agreement on digital multinationals. You saw there's so much effort taking place on taxation, the effort led by OECD for the G20. We need agreement on data and on e-commerce. So these are clearly all areas in which we need an agreement. And so a new framework needs to develop on how we're going to support this new kind of globalization. And I'll end with this note on India. Of course, Mr. Bagla was here. He made he presented his view on what India is doing, and he was absolutely right in the kind of changes that India is seeing. I don't work for the government, but I do want to add a note that there is a fundamental shift that is taking place in India's approach to globalization, in that it is not only securing India's interest at the WTO or in international organizations or trade treaties, but there is a focus now on building industry. It's not just trade promotion. There is a dedicated effort to build industry, because there is a recognition that without domestic champions, without strong Indian firms, India cannot influence the global rules at the WTO or otherwise in our favor, so for it to work. In the end, firms and businesses need to be central to geoeconomics and India's foreign trade policy. And so I think I would leave you with this note that in India, at least, I always advocate that I think the Indian businesses, as they grow, need to take more of an interest in global governance. We are seeing that already by some of the big Indian multinationals. But I hope that you will see Indian multinationals take more of an interest in global governance, especially the outcomes of WTO, of G20 and G7. So I'll stop here and happy to participate or answer questions later as required.
Thank you very much, Akshay. You had 3 seconds, so very well done. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much.